That's what I did. I knew that this morning from
You get the one the panel gets.
Oh, I know that. I feel very important. No, actually, I still have like I think all of the various recitation handouts from all of my classes we're talking about.
Yeah, me too.
Because they're good.
We have all the same ones.
Yes.
Every one of my music history classes in my doctorate.
I know. We
Well,
I know a
maybe
lot of
we
classes.
well, I mean, we did have one. One of my friends who goes to Florida actually came to the audition
I don't know. No, I don't have Navy. I have Air Force, Marines. My grandfather was in the Air Force. His older brother was in the Army. His younger brother was in the Army. I have an uncle who was in the Marines. And I have 3 cousins that are in the Army that regularly make trips up to Ireland. They live in my concert friend. I know. One lives in Baltimore, and one lives. Was it Atlanta?
Eu tô trabalhando muito.
But it's funny because my grandfather always uses that terminology.
É 5 horas.
You've been out of the Air Force.
Você? Vou gravar. Não, é aula de vídeo.
It's actually like the early.
Ah, não, sim. E como que tá o final do... Você se formou agora?
He had asthma, but it wasn't affecting him while he was there. And he had
Eu tô muito cansado. Pra mim, tipo, ano passado já foi difícil. Esse ano tá tipo... É, mas eu não me formo muito bem. Porque eu mudei de origem. Então, eu tenho que ficar uma mais de algumas aulas. Eu prefiro correr com tudo. Ah, vai ter? Nossa, com certeza.
E o outro Vitor, vai fazer
Vocês ficam por aqui durante o verão também?
Eu nunca fiquei nessa conversa.
Eu também. Então eu tô meio perdido, assim, tipo, não tem como ir, tá? Não sei o que eu vou fazer. Eu acho que o dia 5 eu começo a aula antes.
Well, okay.
Mas, tipo, tem que escutar. Já, várias vezes me sinto bom. Tipo, ainda assim, eu acho que chega. Tipo, num shopping baixo e tal. Eu tava pensando em mais perguntar pra eles, tipo, se eu não poderia fazer um pacote, sabe? Sei lá, pagar, alguma coisa assim, ou eu ir lá buscar, tipo, pra semana, sabe? Assim, em vez de pagar, tipo, como se eu tivesse comido exatamente todo dia, tipo, sei lá, sabe?
Here, you got it.
That's yours.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. Whatever I'm not forgetting. And my wife will like, yeah, like I was eating it, I'm just gonna forget.
Oh, shit.
Really? I've not met him.
Who you see with them?
Wait, wasn't there a third Gaylien? I would have been like, from my new
It's getting near my end anyways, way. I'm short.
I remember back in fourth grade, they had those awesome sticks with like the pencil cap. And they could take it and they could slam they used it as like a pointer stick, but they wouldn't like damage the board or anything, so they had to have it around. They just go, wait!
It's funny.
I was like, that is not all I'm saying. Especially because they still had those like those projector screens, but they had like the map on it, so they pull it down and they go, that is Denmark. Okay.
I guess I don't use the
And then and then they went to in middle school. And then we stopped using maps. We just switched down. It was like the experience of what it would have been like to have one class and like we had to like dress up in the time period, picnic basket, and like be actually taught as if we were in the classroom. And at the end of it, we all got answers. But happy teacher. It's so much pre-order. So everybody has free pencils, but they're like actually there's 3 pencils in my house right now, and it says Schumann took care of. Even though I know I just want them to experience. I don't know why I told you that. Whatever. I don't know what goes on when I do this stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's, once you have financial needs.
No. What?
Who's your teacher? Who are they? I can't. With Jake. He's still.
transcriptions and what might make a good one. I've kind of been interested in transcriptions most of my horn playing life. A lot of repertoire for brass is transcribed, as most of you know, most of you are brass players. We didn't get the valve until 1814. So our repertoire is a little bit limited to after that, and quite a bit after that because the valve was a little bit sketchy at first. So for me, when I hear a piece that I like, I'm almost immediately wondering what it would sound like on horn or for a brass quintet or something like that. And it's certainly true of the last piece we're going to play, the transcription that I did, the Schumann. But as we all also know, not all transcriptions are created equal. Some tend to be pretty idiomatic, and some are awkward. And as a musician, you kind of know right away when something's not really quite going to work on your instrument. And I'm pretty sure the audience usually tunes into that. And sometimes they don't work because it's just a bad idea. The transcription, the source material doesn't lend itself to the instrument it's transcribed for. And sometimes it's just poor transcription. So we're going to work through a little bit of these issues tonight. As I said, I played numerous transcriptions. In some ways, and I probably shouldn't even admit this, it's possible that I played more transcriptions than actual original works. If you played a lot of brass quintet, you've played a lot of transcriptions, unfortunately. So the thesis that I've kind of come up with in my working through transcriptions of mine and others is that we need to be careful about the source work that we choose to transcribe. And we also need to be mindful about how we go about that transcription. Some things we need to pay attention to are the original instrument that the work was composed for, and what the intricacies are, the orchestration, how that instrument functions, what its timbre is, etc. And also, of course, the same considerations must be thought about for the instrument that it's being transcribed for. And sometimes a work may seem like it's perfect for a different instrument. Maybe it's written in the same family of instruments, from cello to violin or trumpet to horn or whatnot. And sometimes it seems like an obvious fit because the sounds are produced the same way, they're in the same family. And sometimes I think that's misleading. I think often, what works for a higher instrument, even though it's produced the same way as a lower instrument, might not work for that lower instrument or vice versa. So we need to look carefully at what we choose to transcribe. I feel that there are some things that all good transcriptions have in common. There are a lot of different ways to be bad, but there are only a handful of ways to be good. No, that's probably not true. There are lots of ways to be good. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to take you through 3 different works in transcription for horn. The first I'm going to start with is the Neruda Trumpet Concerto. Johannes Neruda was a composer in the galant styles between the Baroque and classical. And this piece was actually written for a horn-like instrument that we'll get into later. But this piece is more commonly played on the trumpet, almost exclusive to the trumpet. But there is a horn transcription of it that I'll play for you, and then we'll get to know a little bit more. Another one that personal favorite of mine, and since it is Brahms' birthday, I have to play some Brahms tonight. I'll be playing the first movement of his E minor Cello Sonata in a wonderful transcription by Scott Brubaker. And then finally, you'll be privy to a premiere of a transcription of mine, the first movement of Schumann's 5 pieces in folk style. They were originally for cello also. But before we dive into those pieces, I want to talk a little bit about transcriptions in general and a little bit of a historical overview of transcriptions. Excuse me. So first things first, what exactly is a transcription? You stay out of that light. And how does a transcription differ from a paraphrase or a quote or an arrangement? Sometimes these terms get thrown around to mean basically the same thing, but I feel that there are some distinctions. So if Busoni, who did a number of transcriptions, particularly of Bach is what he's most famous for, said that everything is a transcription. That once it's in the composer's imagination, just getting it from the imagination to the page is a form of transcription. And I think that's really important to think about because, well, what I found as a transcriber, the things that I think work in my head don't always work on the page. And but all kidding aside, so everything is in transition, I think, and also from the page to the performance. That's a transcription because it's a particular performer's interpretation. And then how the audience perceives it, that's another form of transcription. Did I lock people out? Okay. So a couple months ago, we were really lucky to have the great pianist and transcriber Cathryn Cummings come here and do a lecture recital here at Hart. And he discussed what his thoughts on transcription were, because he's done a number of really great ones. And I really like what he said. He said that a transcription is a respectful and artful reinvention of the original work. And that's what I aim to showcase here tonight. An arrangement, this is also according to the Juju, are kind of simplistic, sometimes utilitarian, just a simple recasting of material from one instrument or voice or group of instruments to another. And those can be great, they can be really useful, especially in, like I said, a utilitarian kind of circumstance. You have a string quartet and you're looking at a woodwind quintet. And how are you going to make one to the other? So that can be useful. So paraphrases are looser interpretations of an original work. The creator may actually insert newly composed material into the source material. An example of these are Liszt's wonderful opera paraphrases, which if you haven't listened to, go out and do that. They're really fantastic. Quotes are a whole different type of transcription in and of themselves. It's where a little snippet of a piece, or maybe a phrase, or even just a motive, are transported from an original work into a new work. If you think about the works of Charles Ives, they're loaded with quotes, almost too many to count some of them. So that's kind of the basics of what we think about when we think about transcriptions and kind of how I'm thinking about it. And the jury's still out as to whether my transcription is a transcription or an arrangement, but we'll see when we get there. So sometimes transcriptions can have a bad rap, right? I think as brass players, we've had, we've been looked down upon a little bit for having a large body of transcribed repertoire. But actually transcriptions have a long history, long history. Transcription has been practiced literally throughout music history, from medieval organum, Renaissance cantus firmus and paraphrase masses, classic era transcriptions of Bach and Handel that Mozart has done. There are romantic era transcriptions of operas, art songs and symphonies by Liszt, and arrangements of Bach works by Mendelssohn, Brahms, Schumann, and Busoni. And I want you to note that two of the composers that I'll be performing in transcription tonight also are transcribers themselves. So it's kosher. Hopefully they would approve. And then even into the 20th century, Schoenberg, Stokowski, Ravel, and Berio were big fans of the transcription and created their own. And again, I keep saying this, but I think that this weighs heavily on me right now. is that because brass instruments have such a limited repertoire, we tend to resort to transcriptions, and I kind of like to think of it as, rather than resorting to somebody else's repertoire, more to exploring it, and certainly welcome other instruments, players of other instruments to explore the horn repertoire, because actually we have a lot of really great stuff too. And as I said, the brass quintet is a main sticking point of transcriptions. They have had a reputation for not having any real repertoire of their own. And I think that's part of where the bad reputation of transcriptions has come from, is if all you do is transcriptions, maybe you're not commissioning works or finding new works. So I certainly don't have a pejorative view of transcriptions, or otherwise I wouldn't be standing here. But I try to think of it as a broad, almost a genre in and of itself. So why do we have this drive to transcribe? As I said, transcription has been practiced throughout music history. What makes us want to transcribe? When I hear Schumann 5 pieces in folk style, the very first time I heard that piece, it's like an epiphany. That would be great for the horn. Why do I want to do that? I think there are three main reasons that we transcribe, at least here in the 21st century. The first one is to gain insight into a composer's thought process. I think by diving deeply into the piece to find out how it works, which is the only way you can do a transcription, is to really be very deeply involved in the piece. It gives you new insight into the composer's thought process that you couldn't have simply by listening or even by playing a piece. By making it your own, you're gaining that insight. And another main reason, and when I asked Frederick Q why he transcribes, he gave this exact answer: to hear a piece in a new way. It's very interesting to hear things. It's like trying on a different hair color or something. You get a different color, a different style, a different flavor of a piece that you already know. And I think that's really important and can give us insight into that work simply by hearing it in a different way and changing our perspective on it. And of course, another big one is to simply expand the instrument's repertoire. And as I mentioned, the horn repertoire tends to skew later from the second half of the 19th century into present, simply because the valves became standard at that time. They didn't even exist before that. So it's a way for us to have some earlier repertoire that we might not have had, and to kind of, this may be pushing it a little bit, but answer the question, what would these composers have written had the valve been a chromatic instrument at the time that they were writing? Which there's no real way to answer that, but it's an interesting question to pursue. So getting into the nuts and bolts of transcriptions, we need to figure out what the considerations of the source work are, of the original piece. And some of them that I've encountered are range. So if you're trying to play a trumpet piece on horn, is the range practical? Also the register and the leaps, the technical difficulty. Horn and tuba don't quite get around the instrument quite as quickly as the clarinet and flute do. The number of notes performed at a given time, so double stops become a problem when you're doing string transcriptions. The text, a lot of transcriptions have been from pieces with text to instrumental works, and so in that situation, the transcriber would need to think about how they can imbue the piece with the meaning of the text without actually having the words. The character of the piece, I feel that this is quite possibly the most important aspect. Do we want to stay true to the character of the piece, or do we want to change it completely? And how important is it to stay true to the character of the piece? Other important things to think about are the methods of producing sound. So is it a bowed sound? Is it a wind instrument? Is it percussive sound? And then the volume that an instrument can produce. Brass instruments tend to be louder than string instruments, and how does that affect the approach to the transcription? So once you've decided on a piece to transcribe, there are things that also need to be considered, which is, can the new instrument be reasonably expected to meet the demands of the original work? And if not, how do you account for these problems? How do you get around these problems and still remain true to the character of the piece or whatever your goal of transcription is? And like I said before, is it okay to change the character of the piece? It might be. When I transcribe, one of my goals is to stay true to the character of the piece, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way to do it. And I think this is really important. What contribution to the repertoire does the transcription make, if any? So if a transcription is so difficult that it never gets played, is there value to it? There may be, there may not. But my goal when I transcribe is to make a contribution to the repertoire. So once these things have been considered and the transcription is done, how do we judge the quality of the transcription? Another famous transcriber, Sirachi, asked, does the transcription display the work to as much or greater advantage? Does it reveal new aspects thereof? Does it sound as or more effective in its new form than in the original? And that's important. Have we created an advantage by transcribing? Have we learned anything from it? Have we created a new work that's valuable on its own? And then Sirachi also said that the skill and the resource wherewith the new medium is used, the ingenuity displayed in transplanting technical devices of the instrumental writing of the original into that of the new medium, or how far its deficiencies, if any, are effectively substituted for. So I think it gives us somewhat of a basis for judging the quality of the transcription. Now, of course, it's in the ear of the beholder what one person may think is a great transcription, another may not. But those are some things to think about. So I'm going to start off with the Neruda Trumpet Concerto. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that piece and then go ahead and play a little bit of it for you. The concerto originated as a concerto for corno da caccia, and the corno da caccia was actually a natural, unvalved instrument, but much smaller than the horn, shaped like a horn, but smaller, with a smaller bore, and often played by trumpet players. So it's kind of, if you want to think about it as somewhere between a horn and a trumpet, that might be the way to think about it. The liner notes of one of the CDs that I'm going to play for you in a minute explained it well. So this concerto, originally written for corno da caccia, hunting horn, has been neglected by horn players. The justification for playing it on the trumpet is the undoubted crossover in the 18th century between horn and trumpet players, and its high tessitura, which is more suited to the modern trumpet than to the modern horn. And that, in a nutshell, explains why this piece is considered a trumpet concerto and not a horn concerto. It may have started out as a horn-ish concerto, but it's not part of the horn repertoire. And the corno da caccia was actually played very commonly by trumpet players. And there's a modern version of that instrument that actually is played by trumpet players. I don't know of any horn players who play it. Everyone I know who plays one is a trumpet concerto. So I'm going to play a short clip of a little bit of this first movement played by a modern corno da cacio. So this is a corno da cacio that has vowels. You'll notice this guy's cheating and using his vowels. It's okay, that's what I'm going to do. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what this piece sounds like on a horn trumpet hybrid corno da cacio. I also want to play a clip of it on trumpet so you can get the sound of the character of the piece. This is one version, and now I'm going to play it for you in the trumpet version. So it gives you an idea as to the light and bright and high character of the original work. So as you may have guessed, there is a horn transcription of this, but I feel like this piece is problematic for the modern horn. Excuse me. So while it seems like this would be a good piece to transcribe for horn, of course, what you just heard was way too high for the horn. Even the horn players are nodding their heads. Even in the era that it was composed, where horns were smaller, they were specialized players, and for modern horn players, it's pretty excessive, even with a very small descant horn. So there's a way of dealing with it, which is to play it down an octave. And rather than explain to you what it sounds like down an octave, I'll play it for you. So this is just going to be a very short snippet, approximately what you just heard. that doesn't seem to quite capture the character of this light, bright, Galant-style trumpet concerto. And it's been recorded that way. More players have done it. It's convenient that it's an E flat, and we're very comfortable reading E flat. So it seems to make sense. But it seems to lack something. It doesn't quite have that bright characteristic. So there's another way to address it, which is Edmond Leloir, a very famous horn player, Belgian or French, did a transcription for horn that I'm going to show you now. And what he did to get around this problem of it being too high, what he did was take it down a step and a half. So from E flat, he's transposed it while he transcribed it, and he transposed it to C. So right off the bat, that can be a problem, because when composers write a piece in a particular key, there's usually a reason for it. Sometimes it's practical because this instrument works well in this key or whatnot, but often it has to do with the character of the piece. So I feel that that's problem number one. Problem number two is this. It's still pretty darn high. And now you know why I'm only going to play a short portion of it. Now, I'm sure there are players who can play this entire concerto written that way and not pass out. But there comes a point where is it more trouble than it's worth? And if you get specialized equipment, that makes it a little bit easier too. But I'll let you hear for yourself. I promise you, I'm trying to play this as well as I can. I'm not stacking the deck. So as you can see, that's kind of problematic too. As I said, I'm sure there are people who can play it well, but the question is, should they? And also, you know, all seriousness, when the horn is placed that high in its range, the harmonic series, when we're very high up in the harmonic series, the chances for a wrong partial get exponentially higher. All the horn players are nodding. So it's best when you write for horn to avoid writing this high for this sustained of a period of time. And maybe Monsieur Leloir had amazing high chops. It's very possible that it worked fine for him because he was an amazing player. But I think for the average horn player on a modern horn, or even the above average horn player on a modern horn, is just not practical. So, I want to move on now to the Brahms, which I feel really does work. Actually, I'm going to play it for you first. I've already told you what I think, but I'd like for you to be able to hear what you think works about it and what doesn't, and see if your opinions match mine. We can talk about it at the reception. One of the immediate problems of playing a piece for cello is that the cello doesn't have to empty any water. So when I play this piece, I like to be good and empty. Because there just aren't very many opportunities. Forgive me. Thank you very much. I really enjoy that piece, and I really enjoy that transcription. It was done by a horn player in New York in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra named Scott Brubaker. And before we get too involved in this particular transcription, I want to read some of his notes that he gave to the player in this work. In the preface, he says, "My primary motivation for making this transcription was to contribute something truly substantial to the repertoire for horn and piano, both in quality and dimension. The recitalist is confronted with a host of choices that are good, performance-worthy, and even highly interesting, but precious few that can safely be called great. Additionally, there is the problem of size. Of those rarities that I include on my list of great pieces, none are much longer than 15 minutes, and the overwhelming majority are far shorter. These are common frustrations in programming. Brahms's Opus 38 offers an answer to both difficulties. Coming from the loftiest plane of musical composition and running about 26 minutes, it offers a most attractive center of gravity for any recital." Then he goes on to say, "What first inspired me to consider the sonata as a suitable work for horn was its deeply lyrical, romantic character and its tonal attributes. One only need consider the glorious horn solos that grace Brahms' symphonies and serenades, or the glowing melodies the cello that's so often given to sing, to see that it was clearly warmth of tone rather than brilliance that most attracted him. The transcription seemed appropriate principally because of the tonal kinship between these two instruments. Furthermore, the horn can infuse the work with its own unique colorations and thus provide fresh insights into the piece. Although the cello is the irreplaceable muse of the sonata, the horn is a more equal match for a grand piano, which with this more powerful partner, needn't hold back at the higher dynamic levels. The horn voice can be heard clearly at all dynamic levels, particularly in passages in the middle and low lying registers, while still preserving the Brahmsian ideal of warm, passionate tone. I maintain that the horn's lower reaches can be a beautifully rich and well-focused extension of the range for which the horn is loved. The sonata in E minor is a wonderful challenge that will especially test one's endurance, low register, and flexibility, not to mention musicianship. Here is an authentic masterpiece of chamber music to inspire the effort that will make its performance deeply rewarding. I think that's a really good snapshot of why we do transcriptions. And I think his motivations seem, I don't want to use the word pure, but purely musical, put it that way, are musical. And he addresses a lot of the things that I'm about to talk to you about with this, just in that preface. I agree that the cello makes really good source material for the horn. In all of the different areas that we talked about range, timbre, tone, color, in a variety of other ways. The technical expectations of the instrument. And it's also, should be noted that often in orchestral works, the horn and the cello are playing the same line at the same time to reinforce one another. So they're kind of, kindred spirits in a way. So it makes good sense. So those are the kind of surface reasons why I think this piece works well for the horn. I'm going to show you an image of the original and play you a little bit of it on cello, and you can decide for yourself whether the character that I just gave you matches the original. So that's just a little bit of what Brahms had in mind originally when he wrote the piece. So some other factors besides character and timbre and tone color that could contribute to why this works well. Busoni might say that it was because of the era of this original work. He felt like you could preserve Bach without losing the Bach style, and you could You could transcribe Bach without using the Bach style, but preserving the classical style in transcription is more problematic. So this may be the problem with the Neruda. Could be simply that preserving that style is a little more difficult, whereas the Romantic works may lend themselves better to transcription. Possible, just a theory, but it's very possible that that's part of why it works. The Bach cello suites, of course, have been transcribed for every instrument imaginable. So that's an example of that. I also feel that in terms of Brahms's overall output, this is a good match for what he did actually write for the horn. This piece was written in 1865, which is the same year that he wrote his famous horn trio. Notice it's only 2 opus numbers earlier. The horn trio was opus 40, and this is opus 38. But Brahms, when he wrote his horn trio, and pretty much everything else he wrote for the horn, was thinking about the natural horn. He didn't believe in this newfangled valved horn. He felt that the true character of the horn was the natural horn. So I can only imagine what he might have written for the horn had he maybe lived 50 years longer and maybe eventually bought into this whole valve business. He didn't write any sonatas for horn, but the horn trio pretty much takes care of that for us. It's one of our favorite pieces to play. But it is interesting that this piece worked so well for horn and that it was written almost immediately before the horn trio. You know, if Brahms had written for the valve horn, would it have sounded anything like this cello sonata? Who knows? But it's something to think about. But that's not to say that this transcription is without problems. So the first problem is that cellists don't need to breathe in order to power their instruments. They do need to breathe. So the phrases for a stringed instrument can be much longer than that for a wind instrument. So that can be a problem. There are large leaps that are a little bit problematic for cellists as well, but they are particularly problematic on the horn. The cello also plays constantly, whereas the horn players, we typically take a break to empty our horn of water, to let the blood flow back to our lips. Speaking from experience, it's a very different challenge for me to have my horn on my face for that long. It's unfamiliar to me as a horn player. There are a couple of double stops in the original, which we can't do, not very well. Use multiphonics, but that's not very Brahmsian. So I want to show you the transcription that Scott Brubaker did. So this is what it looks like when it becomes a horn sonata. And he did a really good job of staying true to the original. He kept it in E minor, something that Sir Lillewire did not do, keep in the original key. And he essentially put it in the right clefs and added breath marks. Those are the main things that he did. Now, there are a couple of changes that he made. Which we'll get to in a second. I want to go back to these breath marks. You can't see my extra breath marks written in there. But I found that his breath marks are very well thought out. I used every single one of them and then some. I have a slightly smaller lung capacity than Mr. Brubaker apparently, and but I do find for most horn players that those breath marks are well thought out. He even did the classic. I do this. I can show you the parenthetical breath mark, the "if you need it" breath mark, which which I use that all over my parts, that if you get into trouble, here's another place to breathe. That is a musically well thought out place, not just a last gasp. He changed a couple of articulations to make them sound more cello-like than what a horn player would do. Measure, let's see if I can point this out. 30. Going out of order, so. In 26, hear these big leaps? Those are not slurred in the cello part, but if we were to play them articulated, they would come out much choppier than what Brahms would intend. That's another change that he made. He also gave the horn player the option to leave out some notes if you need to empty the water, get some blood flowing back to your face. I did not opt out of any of those, but there are a couple of passages. This is one. See the ones in the brackets actually measure 37, 38, and there. You can leave those out if you need a break. But he actually advises against it. What he says is, well, he advises against that, and also the opening, he says it can be taken up an octave, which he really advises against because you lose the character of that deep, rich sound. So I kept it the original octave. This is lower than the average horn part, but sometimes it's fun to play though. He also came up with good solutions to double stops by just picking the important notes. There is a questionable choice, and I'll show it to you now. If you look at right in here, measure 119, 120, this whole passage in here. The original is 2 quarter notes with grace notes that are the cellos. There's no articulation. It's a slur bar between the 2 quarter notes, and he measured them out like this. I have played it that way, and I didn't like it. That's not how, I hope, not how I played it just a minute ago. What I did is I added in the slur all the way from the upper C to the lower C. I've found that in this measured way, with the accents, it comes off a little too choppy and a little not, it doesn't lead towards the bottom note in the right way. So I played it kind of closer to grace notes. Also, he compressed these passages by an octave. That lower C should be an octave below that. I didn't do that, but I think that would be a good option. And I kind of wish he would have given us that option of, hey, these are originally an octave lower. Because I might have gone for it if I had known the rules sooner. So in general, I think this works very well. So the advantages of this transcription are that there's a better balance, I feel, between the horn and the piano in certain passages than with the cello. In fact, when this piece was premiered, the cellist said that Brahms was playing the piano so loud that he couldn't hear himself play the cello. So that's not likely to happen with a horn. I could hear myself fine the whole time. So that's an advantage, that sometimes where the cello timbre and texture gets a little lost in the piano, the horn less so, even in the extreme low register. And the ability to get a little brighter, a little bit brassier on the horn in the horn timbre, I think can help give another dimension of character to the piece, and enhance the drama. The other advantages to this piece is that, of course, it adds a significant romantic work to the horn repertoire. And it's possible that a cellist listening to the horn version of this or looking at the music could learn a little bit about breathing him or herself. I know we have to breathe out of necessity. We have to put breaks between our phrases in order to get through the phrases, in order to get through the piece. Sometimes string players are very single-mindedly connecting phrases, which is a great thing to do, but I believe that music needs to breathe from time to time as well. So hopefully cellists are learning something. So, from exploring these transcriptions, I have started to educate myself about how to create a good horn transcription for myself. And I have gone again to a cello piece because I feel that the cello is a good match for the horn. It's obviously not the only good instrument to transcribe from, but I feel that for the reasons I've mentioned, with its color and the lyrical writing that happens for both cello and horn, I think it's a good match. I'm going to play you a little bit of the original on cello with the music, so you can hear what it's supposed to sound like, and then I'll play you my transcription. So that's a little bit of what Schumann actually wrote. I'll show you what I wrote. Very similar. In fact, really, it could be argued that what I did so far is an arrangement, because I basically kept everything the same. I've added breath marks where I feel that I need them. I've kept the articulations the same, which I have found that as horn players, we tend to play shorter than cellists when there's a dot. So I've had to lengthen my articulations a little bit. But as I put, Mr. Leloir and Mr. Brubaker through the paces of why they are transcribing, is there value to what they're doing, I'm going to put myself through the same paces. So what's the justification for this transcription? Obviously, I like the piece. The first time I heard it, I thought, that would be great to play. I would love to play that. But also the humorous character of it. The horn can be a little humorous, whether we want it to or not. It also has the noble character that the horn is known for. And lyrical style, the humorous offbeat accents, those all spoke to me as a horn player. Incidentally, I didn't include it in my score, but Schumann gave this piece a subtitle, Vanitas Vanitatum, which in Latin translates as roughly to futility of mankind. I don't even know where to go with that, but maybe a certain melancholy that can come with the cello's tone, color, as well as the horns. It's also interesting to note that Schumann wrote this piece the same year that he wrote the Adagio and Allegro for horn, 1849. In 1849, the valve was still kind of new. In fact, the Adagio and Allegro is one of the first solo pieces to be written for the valve horn. and he included an optional cello part. And cellists play this piece all the time. So if they can play our pieces, we can play theirs. But that's not really what I'm thinking. So it speaks to the crossover that Schumann may have heard between the horn and the cello, similar to what I discussed earlier with Brahms. So it's interesting to think, as I did with Brahms, what would Schumann have written for the horn had he had the valve been a little bit more developed? Now, there's nothing to say that the Adagio and Allegro isn't a major and difficult work for the horn. So maybe that's as hard as it gets, and that's okay. So I will premiere for you now the first movement of the 5 pieces in folk style. I'll leave some of this up so you can tell if I'm playing the right notes or not. And you enjoy. Thank you very much. I just want to say a couple more words about why I think this works. You notice it's very sectional, which gives the horn player a chance to breathe. I'm sure that's not what Schumann was thinking about, but I noticed when I first started working on it, I was trying to just keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, and then I realized that's not what he meant. He meant for it to breathe. So I think that's another thing that makes it work really well for horn. So in the last few minutes, I'm just going to open it up to questions, and if you have a question for me, I'm happy to try to answer it. Going once?
I have one.
Oh, okay.
There are 5 pieces. Are you going to go ahead and transfer?
Yes, I am. Good question. That's my mom. She's good at helping me promote myself, whether she knows it or not. So eventually, the other 4 pieces will be done as part of my doctoral essay. So stay tuned. Emily.
What other instruments do you think work well for transcribing?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Sometimes viola works well, but it can get too high, so that can create a problem. Trombone works to a large degree. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say these instruments work and those instruments don't. But there are trends. You know, some things tend to work better than others. Chandra.
So rather saying this instrument would be better, would it depend more on what is being transcribed? Like
Absolutely.
the piece itself instead of-
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of factors. There are plenty of pieces for cello that I'm sure would not work for horn at all. And there, are plenty of pieces for trumpet that might work for horn. So it's a combination of the, I think what the composer intended, the characteristics of both the original work and the instrument that it's being transcribed to, and the intentions of the transcriber. Is you could conceivably transcribe something that doesn't particularly work well, but you can make it work by maybe doing a paraphrase and adding some of your own composition to it. I think Dr. Browse had a question.
Yeah, for the first piece, have you listened to Pablo Casal's recording?
I knew you were going to come up with something I hadn't done yet. No, I haven't listened to Pablo
No,
Casal's.
it's a very, very numerous performance, and it takes a lot more freedom, let's say, between the phrases, if you can imagine, and really exaggerates between the slurred notes and the short notes.
Oh.
And we mentioned earlier that on the horn, there's a tendency for folks to kind of play some matchsticks that kind of really short. I think that, keeping that type of playing in mind might make the transcription a little closer to the source than before.
I'll have to check it out. I think Eduardo had one.
Yeah, besides these pieces that you displayed today, were there any candidates that didn't make it?
Anything that didn't make it? In terms of good transcriptions or bad transcriptions? Yes, all of the above. I considered the, Scott Brubaker also did a transcription of the clarinet sonatas. And some movements work and some don't. And that was a possible contender for talking about within the same transcriber, within the same piece, what works and what doesn't. But again, it's all in the ear of the beholder.
Going the other direction, is there a rush for the cellos to take the horn literature and transcribe the cello?
Not as much. As I said, they do play the Adagio and Allegro. Incidentally, here at Hart, there's been a rash of oboists playing the Adagio and Allegro because Professor Lucarelli did a transcription. It's a great piece. The instruments that tend to borrow horn literature tend to be trombone players and tuba players. That happens a lot because they don't have Mozart concertos that we did. Did you have a question?
I'm asking this as a non-horn player. Exactly how idiomatic would you say transcription is?
How, I'm sorry.
Idiomatic.
Idiomatic.
The French
This is actually quite idiomatic. It works really well for the horn. The other movements, part of the reason that I don't have them yet, are less idiomatic. The second movement will work very well. The third movement has an extended double stop section that I'm gonna have to figure out what to do with. But this piece is, I mean, what you see up here, I don't think any of the horn players are shrieking and running out of the room. Which the Neruda transcription, every horn player I've shown this to has gone, oh my goodness, I do not want to play that. So that's a way to tell, how idiomatic it is whether the instrumentalist actually wants to play it. Going once? Dr. Rouse.
You probably know that there's an alternate viola part in the horn trio.
Yes.
You can also play that. Like put the horn part on the viola.
It's been done.
You haven't heard it?
I haven't heard it, but it's fairly common. There's also a violin part to the Schumann that he's added. It's a little bit different, and I don't know if it was Schumann who added things or a transcriber. There is a violin part sanctioned by Schumann. Somebody else? Yes.
Will this be copyrighted?
I hope to publish it eventually. It probably far down the line. I have to finish it and get through the doctoral essay process and then find a publisher or self-publish. But I hope to get it out. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you all for coming. It was really a pleasure playing for you. And you're all invited to a reception at Salute in downtown Hartford. The address is on your programs, and I hope to see you there. Thank you very much.